My name is Ava, and I never imagined the weight that a simple whisper could carry. I remember how our mornings used to feel warm, like sunlight spilling through curtains, gentle and certain. But that feeling started to drift away, like foam washed off the shore, a little fragment at a time. In those first few days, I noticed him standing too close when I reached for mugs in the kitchen, his hand brushing mine just a fraction too long. I told myself it was nothing, just a careless touch, but my pulse thumped whenever he leaned in to speak, words too soft, too rehearsed. We would laugh over small things, the usual silly jokes we shared, but sometimes his laugh sounded hollow, like it echoed in an empty room. I would feel it slip through me, that uneasy feeling stirring in my chest. During our late-night talks about dreams, where we saw ourselves years from now, he started to hesitate mid-sentence, eyes flickering somewhere behind mine. I chalked it up to tiredness or stress, but deep down, I wondered if something was off. One evening, after we returned from that familiar stroll down the path by the river, I paused at the door, waiting for him to pull his keys from his coat. He stared ahead like he didn't know where he was, lips pressed together, jaw tight. I asked a question, simple, something about dinner, but he blinked and shook his head, almost involuntarily. Then he slipped past me into the apartment, silent as a shadow. Inside, the air felt too cool, as if the walls had shifted. I dropped my bag and called his name. My hands trembled, a cold sweat creeping along my spine. He stood at the window, watchful, stiff, shoulders square. That moment felt like a trap snapping shut, and I couldn't breathe. I took a step forward, words lodged in my throat, but he turned and asked if I wanted to watch something on TV. The ease in his voice made my throat close up even more. We sat on the couch, side by side but miles apart, and watched the screen, the light flickering shadows across his face. His presence felt heavy, a silent accusation I couldn't name. I kept waiting for the slip, the sign, the proof that something had changed. When he reached for the remote, his fingers brushed mine, and I realized I was both relieved and terrified, like suddenly craving warmth after standing too close to a flame. That night, I lay awake listening to sounds that had once been comforting, his steady breathing, the soft hum of traffic outside. Now each noise felt amplified. My heart pounded in my ears, my jaw clenched, and my mind raced through memories, searching for the shift that marked the betrayal I couldn't yet see. Fear and denial tangled in my chest, twisting my breath into quick, shallow gasps. And then, just as my eyelids grew too heavy, I heard the whisper. It wasn't his voice exactly, but words floating from the other room, words too intimate, too certain, carrying the weight of someone else. My muscles locked, and the world seemed to tilt. In that blur between sleep and wakefulness, I realized the quiet was their perfect cover, the silence hiding a fracture that was already deep and widening. The next morning, I woke with a dry mouth and a pounding headache, but I forced a smile when I joined him in the kitchen. He mirrored my grin, but it felt like a mask, brittle and unnatural. I closed my eyes for a moment, tasting the bitterness in the air. I told myself I would find answers, that I would gather the pieces of that whisper and follow them wherever they led. It felt like staring down a dark corridor, but I was already stepping forward, one trembling foot at a time. And as I watched him pour coffee with deliberate calm, my own calm settled into a strange resolve. I knew I couldn't stay in that room forever, trapped between what I felt and what I saw. And as I reached for my cup, the edges of my vision sharpened, and I understood that tonight would change everything, and I would be ready. And as I watched him pour coffee with deliberate calm, I felt a resolve settle into my bones. I waited for hours, half-heartedly scrolling through my phone while he retreated to his study. Smoke from his last cigarette curled upward in the ashtray, acrid and sharp. The air between us felt thick, like molasses, slowing every movement and thought. When he finally emerged, his expression was guarded, eyes flicking away. I realized then that moving slowly gave me more time to observe, to notice the crease in his forehead that hadn't been there before, the way he flicked crumbs off the table as though wiping away some unspeakable stain. It wasn't long before I found the first clue. A slender envelope tucked beneath his laptop, not quite hidden. When I picked it up, the paper was too glossy, the handwriting too perfect. My pulse hammered as I slid it open. The words inside were brief, almost casual, yet seared with intensity, promises of meetings, confessions of longing in scripted lines. My hands shook and I pressed the letter to my chest, trying to anchor my racing heart. The coffee went cold on the table, its warmth long gone. Later, I replayed that moment in my mind, turning the words over like stones in my palm, searching for weight, for substance. When he returned home that night, he swore he'd been working late, drafting new proposals. His voice was steady, persuasive. But I could feel it, this distance growing, like an ocean between us that no whisper could bridge. I asked about the envelope, but he sighed and told me I must be imagining things. His jaw tensed, and for a heartbeat I saw something flicker behind his eyes. Regret? Fear? I couldn't tell which, but it chilled me. Days passed in a blur. I watched him under a microscope, how he answered calls, the brief smile he gave at the screen, the way he tucked his phone beneath cushions before falling asleep. I felt myself unravel, at once vigilant and weary, each breath laced with suspicion. My vision tunneled whenever I thought of him, and every familiar corner of our home morphed into a potential hiding place for secrets. I found myself tracing the pattern of our shared blanket, imagining words stashed between the fibers. Then came the night I followed him. He'd claimed to meet a colleague at a quiet café, but his car pulled into a darkened side street instead. My grip tightened on the steering wheel as I trailed him, heart hammering against ribs. I parked 2 blocks away and watched through the window as he slipped into an alleyway and disappeared behind a heavy door. My breath caught, and I was both terrified and determined. I waited, starved of air and certainty, until the door opened and a silhouette emerged. Her silhouette, the same one I'd glimpsed in that letter's margin, the curve of her hair, the tilt of her head. He paused at her side, hand brushing hers with a tenderness that turned my blood to ice. I didn't speak. I retreated into the shadows, my mind racing with fury and betrayal. My legs shook with adrenaline, every muscle taut. I fled into the night, back to our empty apartment that felt suddenly like a cage. The silence there was deafening. I sank onto the couch, chest heaving, and realized I no longer recognized the life we'd built, the laughter, the plans, the quiet mornings. None of it felt real anymore. Only the ache of deception remained. In the days that followed, I confronted him, not with shrieks or tears, but with measured calm, as though I were a stranger reciting lines I'd written in advance. He stared at me, confusion flickering, then guilt, then something like sorrow. I watched his shoulders slump. The man who once filled our mornings with warmth now seemed frail, unmoored. And as I spoke his name, my voice low and cracking, I understood there was no turning back. The river of silence had broken, and we were left to navigate its swift, unforgiving current together. As dawn approached one morning, I gathered the evidence I'd hidden away, the letter, the photos on my phone, the torn fragments of excuses, and laid them on the table between us. He looked from the papers to me, eyes wide. I closed my own, tasting steel on my tongue. I would not let this stand. And soon, I would make him see what betrayal truly feels like. It was late, the kind of night when the silence feels too heavy to breathe, and I found myself waiting in the living room, my chest tight. He drifted in with that same calm I'd come to hate, like nothing had changed. I motioned to the coffee table, where I'd spread the items I'd collected, the proofs I needed him to see. First was the photograph. It wasn't a perfect shot, edges curled, the color faded, but I'd spotted it tucked inside a beaten-up book he kept on his desk. In the picture, they were at that friend's rooftop party, his arms slung around her shoulders, her head tilted so close he could have kissed her. Her eyes were bright, laughing, and he looked proud enough that he'd risk a photo, risk me finding it someday. When I held it between trembling fingers, I realized how easily he'd traded the warmth of our mornings for someone else's smile. He swallowed, eyes half-lidded, like he was trying to focus on something behind me. I didn't give him the chance. I slid the photograph forward. "This was you," I said, voice low and shaking. "I found it behind the pages you've been reading." My jaw went rigid, mouth dry. He looked away, shoulders sagging as though he carried a weight only I could see. Then, I pulled out my phone and tapped the screen. The second proof flashed into view, a screenshot of his messages to her. I'd intercepted it by sheer luck. He'd left his phone unlocked that day, and I'd glimpsed the previews on the lock screen. The messages weren't subtle. I miss the way you laugh when you aren't looking, one read. Another, can't wait to feel your hand in mine tonight. Each line was like a drop of acid in my veins. I scrolled slowly, so he could read every word. My hands were shaking, but I didn't flinch. He says this to you, I murmured, eyes locked on his. He ran a hand through his hair, jaw clenched. A low sound escaped him. Was it regret? Shame? Something caught in his throat. I watched every flicker across his face, the tightness around his eyes, the way his lips parted as if to apologize, then snapped shut. It was the most honest moment I'd seen from him in weeks. The silence stretched so long I thought it might swallow me whole. My throat burned, my hands chilled despite the room's warmth. I felt like I was standing on the edge of something I couldn't name, grief, anger, sorrow, hope. All swirling like a storm inside me. Finally, he spoke. His voice was barely above a whisper. I never meant for you to see any of that. He looked so small then, unmoored, as if the proofs had stripped him bare. My heart twisted at that vulnerability, but I couldn't let pain or pity break me now. You didn't think I'd keep this a secret forever, I said. You were wrong. He sank onto the sofa, head in his hands. The light from my phone screen painted his skin pale. I sat opposite him, breathing in the acrid scent of betrayal. I wondered briefly if tears would come, but they didn't. My body felt hollow, every muscle heavy with the weight of what had happened. Yet beneath that hollowness burned a cold resolve. I had called him here to make him see the truth in black and white, so he could no longer deny the fracture he'd created between us. He raised his head, eyes red-rimmed. What do you want me to say? His voice cracked. It felt like an offering, but I knew words weren't enough. Not now. I closed my phone and tucked it away. I gathered up the photograph and laid it back on the table. I want you to understand, I said softly, that this betrayal, changes everything. My voice was steady, but inside I was quaking. I stared at him, waiting for a reaction. He reached for the photo, fingertips brushing mine, and for a second I felt something tug at the edges of my resolve. But then I saw the sorrow in his eyes, the same sorrow that had finally driven me to lay out these proofs, and I knew forgiveness wasn't mine to give. The room was so quiet it felt impossible. I stood, stretched out my hand for him to take, and he hesitated only a moment before gripping it. His skin was still warm. In that instant, I realized this wasn't the end of our story, it was the moment everything shifted. And as I led him toward the front door, guiding him into the cool night air, I knew the real reckoning had only just begun. I guided him into the quiet street, the night air cool against my skin, and felt my heart hammer in my chest. He followed with slow steps, eyes downcast, as though expecting the pavement to swallow him whole. I tightened my grip on his hand, his skin was still warm, but his fingers trembled, and led him toward the riverbank where we first met, our footsteps echoing on the worn path. Halfway there, I stopped. The street lamp painted us in a muted glow. You need to hear what happens next, I said, voice barely above a whisper. He swallowed, his Adam's apple moving as though it carried a weight. I watched his throat work, took in the way his shoulders slumped under guilt and regret. My own limbs felt heavy, like I was wading through mud, guilt warred with fury, and I could feel tears pricking at the corners of my eyes even as my jaw clenched. He exhaled slowly, and for a moment, silence settled between us, thick and pressing. Then he blinked, meeting my gaze. What do we do now? He asked, voice hoarse. Sounding small, like a child lost in a storm. My chest hollowed. I wanted to lash out, to scream, to demand answers. But instead I took a breath, feeling my lungs expand despite the tightness around my ribs. I realized I needed a plan, something to ground me, to transform my pain into purpose. I released his hand and dug in my pocket, pulling out a crumpled receipt I'd slipped inside hours before. I held it out. I need you to admit you lied to me, I said, watching his eyes flick to the paper. His breath hitched. This is from last week, at that cafe you said you weren't at. I felt a rush of triumph, a cold surge, as I recited the details, the time scribbled at the top, the barista's name faintly printed, even the price of that cappuccino he'd claimed was just a quick break. His face paled, and I realized the receipt was more than evidence. It was a blade I held between us. He reached for it, fingertips brushing mine. Electricity shot through me. My heart twisted. He folded his hands over mine, silencing the bone-deep ache in my chest. He began, voice catching. But I couldn't let him off the hook. Not yet. I needed the real story, the why that had driven him to betray the life we built together. I stepped back, pulling the receipt out of his grasp. His eyes tracked every movement. Everything was lies, I whispered. So I need to know why. A dry wind rustled through the trees, carrying the distant murmur of the river beneath the bridge. My throat was raw, my mouth parched. He ran a thumb across the receipt's folded crease, gaze flicking away. It's complicated, he murmured. I felt anger flare at his evasion, but I inhaled slowly, trying to steel myself. Instead, I leaned closer, voice soft but unyielding. I deserve the truth, I said. No more secrets. My collarbones pressed against the thin fabric of my jacket, and my breathing felt shallow, each inhale a reminder of how close I was to breaking. His eyes glistened, remorse and fear intertwined. He glanced at the distant lights of the city beyond the river's curve, as if searching for courage. Then he closed his eyes, stretched out a trembling hand, and touched my cheek. His skin was cool, and heat flared at my temples. He whispered, I'm sorry. It started when, he hesitated, and I tensed, every nerve alight. I needed to hear the rest, his confession, the tangled motives behind the betrayal. But the words froze in his throat. A soft rustle from behind made me spin around. The night seemed to grow darker. I realized the river's current had picked up, its surface rippling like restless skin. The only light came from that solitary street lamp, and in its glow I saw his figure trembling beside me. My heart pounded, knuckles white around the crumpled receipt. I understood then that the reckoning between us was only beginning, and the night would demand more than apologies. It would demand a reckoning of hearts, of truths laid bare beneath the hush of the river's song. I closed my eyes, remembering the way his hand once felt when it belonged only to me. The memory stung like salt in a wound. My fists clenched, nails digging into my palms until blood threatened, and I swallowed back a cry. I realized I was standing on a ledge, between holding on and letting go, between forgiveness and vengeance. The river's song was almost a whisper now, urging me onward. I straightened, lifting my chin. I would learn every detail, the times he'd stolen kisses from her, the secrets hidden in his calls, the lies woven between our shared nights. I would shadow her footsteps, sift through his messages, and expose the truth to light. My body trembled, not just with fear, but with a fierce clarity. This betrayal would not define me, but it would shape what came next. I looked at him, eyes blazing. Tomorrow, I said, voice low. I begin. His breath hitched as he met my gaze, and for the first time I saw hope flicker, perhaps hope that I would still choose him, or perhaps dread that I would not. The river's current carried our silence away, and under that quiet sky, I set my resolve like a stone against the tide. And as we walked back toward home, side by side but worlds apart, I knew that the night had changed me. The reckoning was no longer between us alone, but with everything he'd left unspoken, and I would be ready when dawn broke. I woke well before dawn, the sky still bruised in half-light. My body felt brittle, like the shell of something I'd cracked open and walked away from. I slipped from bed quietly, careful not to wake him, and gathered the receipt, the photo, and my phone into my small bag. As I stepped outside, the cool air bit at my cheeks, and I felt an odd thrill. This was the moment I'd waited for. The plan seemed simple: follow her, learn her patterns, confirm what I already suspected. But when I reached the cafe where she often sat, I saw she wasn't there. I perched at a corner table, heart thudding, hands smoothing the bag strap. The street was empty except for a lone delivery van grinding past and the distant rumble of a train. My thoughts looped. Maybe she changed her routine. Maybe I'd been wrong. My jaw locked at the thought. I checked my phone for the messages again, tracing each word with my thumb. Her name flashed at the top of his messages, so familiar now I could picture her face without seeing it. I swallowed back a wave of nausea. I saw movement at the café's door. She stepped out, hair pinned loosely, coat buttoned high, holding a laconic cup of coffee. My pulse jumped, and I slipped from my seat, folding myself into a waiting shadow. I tailed her at a discreet distance. Each step she took made my vision narrow, the world fading except for her silhouette in front of me. My breath caught when she turned the corner onto the side street. I hesitated only for a heartbeat before I followed. The alley felt too dark, the lamps flickering. My palms went slick with sweat. I reminded myself why I was here, to know the full truth, and forced my legs forward. She paused at a narrow passage where the walls leaned in, and I hunkered behind a dumpster, teeth clenched. My heart hammered so loudly I thought she might hear it echo. Her cup rattled in her hand when she set it on a ledge. She slid a phone from her pocket and dialed. I strained to listen. Tonight, her voice was low. Okay, I'll be there. She paused, then laughed softly, like a breeze rustling leaves, and tucked the phone away. I closed my eyes, trying to calm the storm inside. That laugh, he laughed like that, too, it was too close to home. She turned again and walked toward a building 2 blocks down. I followed, pushing nerves aside. When she reached the door and tested the knob, it clicked open. She slipped inside, and I realized I had to see more. I pressed my back against the wall, lifted my knees, and peeked through the narrow window. The lobby was empty except for a receptionist's desk. She climbed the stairs to an upper floor. I circled the block to reach the entrance at the back. The door there was propped open a crack. I nudged it quietly, slipped inside, and found myself in a dim hallway. My breath fogged in the chill air. Room numbers lined the wall. Her door was at the end. My legs trembled. I inched forward, each step a protest from my body. Outside her door, I crouched low, and held my breath as I heard voices, soft murmurs that I couldn't make out. My chest tightened. I felt the hairs on my neck stand at attention. The door swung open just enough, and she peeked out. My heart lurched, and I ducked back. She stepped into the hall, sensed something, narrowed her eyes. I stayed still, body tensed like prey. The hallway lights buzzed overhead. She glanced around, saw nothing, and retreated back into her room. The door clicked shut. I exhaled with a trembling sigh. I knew then that I couldn't wait any longer. I had the confirmation, I'd seen her leaving his side. Enough for the confrontation I'd planned. I backed away, heart pounding, and slipped out the back door into the gray morning. My legs felt weak, but my resolve had never been stronger. The evidence was clear, but I still had to choose how to confront him. I'd shape my words carefully, let the betrayal sting before I showed my hand. And when I did, he would understand that the night's darkness had finally met its match. Now, as the city's lights dawned around me, I walked home with a steady pace. My breath was slow and deliberate, each exhale releasing a fraction of fear. Inside me burned a new certainty. Tomorrow I would speak his name and demand the answers I deserved. I would stand in that room with my head held high while the proof lay between us like a blade. Reckoning was near, and I was ready. Early light filtered through the curtains, and I woke with a stiff jaw and the taste of resolve on my tongue. My hands hovered over the doorknob as I listened for his breathing, but the bedroom was empty. He must have been gone already. The room felt like a gallery of silence, each object recalling memories now tainted. 2 coffee mugs, his jacket draped over a chair, our shared blanket folded neatly on the couch. I slipped on my shoes with trembling fingers and grabbed the small envelope where I'd stashed the receipt and photo. My heart thumped an uneven rhythm as I descended the stairs. He was seated at the kitchen table, eyes fixed on his mug as if it held answers he dreaded to see. Steam curled lazily from the cup, and I watched it drift in the pale morning light, each swirl mocking the questions I held inside. My mouth felt dry. I took a breath that caught in my chest, remembering my plan. I laid the envelope on the table before I spoke, voice low but unwavering. "We need to talk." The words sounded hollow, even to me. He lifted his head, surprise rippling across his face as though he'd been slapped awake. He stared at the envelope, then at me, eyes flickering hope or fear, I couldn't tell which. His hand hovered above the table as though he wanted to fold the letter back up, to hide what we both already knew. Instead, he clasped his hands in his lap, shoulders curling inward. I slid into the seat opposite him, knees knocking together until I locked them. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else, numb, distant, but filled with tension. I opened my mouth, but the words throbbed against my lips. My throat felt constricted, a dry cord twisting tight. I cleared it, tasted copper. "Last night," I said, "I followed her footsteps into that building. I saw her leave him." I laid the photograph face up beside the envelope. Then I knew for certain. He winced, eyes glistening. I felt a spark of something like pity flicker through me, quick and unwelcome. I gripped the edge of the table so hard that wood splintered beneath my knuckles. A jolt of pain cut through me, jolting away the pity. I forced my gaze back onto him. "Why?" I whispered, the single word clanging through the room. His jaw clenched, so tight that I heard a faint crack. He blinked, swallowed, his Adam's apple working. He looked at the photo, at the receipt beneath it. His breath caught, and he closed his eyes briefly, as if bracing against a storm. When he spoke, his voice was rough, like gravel. "I'm sorry," he began. But I shook my head. "No," I interrupted. My voice rose, hot and raw. "I need the truth. Not apologies." My throat burned. My pulse pounded in my temples. The silence that followed was so loud I nearly covered my ears. He exhaled long and slow, as though drawing courage from the air. He uncrossed his arms, unfolded his hands, and rested them on the table, palms up. He told me fragments, a friendship that slipped into something more during a lonely work trip, a moment of weakness that spiraled. He spoke of guilt, of confusion, but each word felt like glass scraping across my skin. My heart fluttered, lurching between anger and a dull ache of loss. I leaned back, letting the chair catch me. My back pressed against its cold frame, and I felt the tremor in my fingers subside into a solid pulse. I uncapped a pen and scrawled across a sheet of paper 2 columns, what he called love and what he called truth. I slid the page to him. "Decide," I said. "Which do you choose?" My voice softened at the end, but the weight behind it was a stone. He stared at the lines, at the words, "love you," and "honesty first," as though they carried the weight of worlds. He closed his eyes, exhaled, then opened them and met my gaze. His eyes were brimming with tears and something else, someone desperate for redemption. My chest tightened. I realized that my revenge wasn't a moment of retribution but the slow unraveling of a choice. He would choose between the lie that shattered us or the honesty that might rebuild. My hand hovered above his, fingertips brushing mine, and I felt the warmth surge through me. The tension in the room hummed like a wire stretched too tight. And in that moment, as dawn crept across the floor, I knew the true reckoning was just beginning. I felt the weight of his gaze as morning light filtered through the blinds, casting stripes across the kitchen floor. He sat still, eyes fixed on me, waiting for the choice that would shape what came next. My chest tightened, the air thick with unspoken possibilities. I rose from the table and moved to the window, pressing my palms against the cool glass as if I could steady my racing heart by leaning into its smooth surface. Silence stretched between us, heavier than any argument. I closed my eyes and recalled every moment before the fracture, our laughter on rainy afternoons, the quiet comfort of shared blankets, the countless good mornings that once tasted like promise. Now those memories felt fragile, like fragile glass ornaments teetering on a shelf. I opened my eyes, and the world outside seemed distant, as though I were watching life through a veil. Behind me, he stood and approached slowly, each step deliberate. I didn't turn. My fingertips gripped the sill until my knuckles whitened. He cleared his throat, and I felt the tremor in his voice even before he spoke. "I choose honesty," he said, words spilling out in a rush, raw and unpolished. I finally turned to face him. Relief and sorrow fought inside me, twisting my gut. His eyes shone with unshed tears. He swallowed hard, then laid a trembling hand on the table between us. The contact sent a shock through my arm, warmth laced with regret. I pressed my fingers to his, feeling the pulse beneath his skin, a fragile beat that matched my own. He drew in a shaky breath. "I'll end it with her. I swear. No more secrets." His voice cracked on the last word, and I saw the strain in his shoulders, the length of guilt he'd been carrying. But as he spoke, I realized that promises alone weren't enough. I needed proof, a tangible act to rebuild the trust he'd shattered. I released his hand and retrieved the small envelope from my pocket, the one that held the receipt, the photograph, and the truth of his betrayals. I slid it across the table so it paused at the edge, as though daring him to reach for it. "Then begin," I said softly. "Start by handing this to her yourself." My voice felt distant, like it belonged to someone I had left behind. His brow furrowed. He looked down at the envelope, then back at me as if seeing me for the first time. His jaw quivered. After a pause that felt like hours, he reached across the table and picked it up. The paper creaked in his hands, and I noticed his fingers shaking as he unfolded it. He glanced at me, searching for guidance. I nodded once, barely perceptible. He stood and stepped toward the door, envelope in hand. I followed, silent. The hallway at the back of our home felt narrower than before, walls closing in with the weight of our shared history. His steps echoed, mingling with my own, until we reached the front door. Outside, the air was crisp, carrying the scent of wet pavement and distant rain. I watched him pause on the stoop, envelope clutched to his chest, as though it were both a confession and a farewell. A car passed by slowly, its headlights briefly illuminating his face. He exhaled and turned toward me. "I'll come back," he said, voice low. "I need you to see I mean it." His eyes were steady now, determined, but tinged with uncertainty, like he still doubted whether I'd wait. I nodded, the motion feeling heavier than any words I could muster. "I'll be here." My voice was firm, surprising me with its steadiness. I realized then that I wasn't waiting for an apology. I was waiting to see if he could restore what he'd broken, piece by fragile piece. He offered a small, vulnerable smile and stepped off the stoop, heading toward the street where the cafe waited. I watched him go until the envelope was swallowed by the morning shadows. My heart ached, both empty and full of that strange hope that maybe love could survive this reckoning. When he was gone, I slipped back inside and closed the door gently behind me. The house felt quiet, like a room after a storm has passed. I leaned against the door, eyes closed, and let the ache wash through me. My resolve felt tempered now, not the cold hardness of vengeance, but the fragile steel of a heart willing to see truth, no matter how painful. I moved to the kitchen and made 2 cups of coffee, setting one on the table for when he returned. Steam curled upward, carrying the promise of warmth. I sat and waited, hands wrapped around the mug, listening to the soft drip of the faucet. Outside, the world carried on in its usual rhythm, oblivious to the fracture and repair happening here. In that hush, I understood that betrayal wasn't a single moment of heartbreak. It was a river of choices, each one carving deeper into the banks of our bond. And now, at its edge, I sat ready to see if he could change its course. The morning light brightened, and with it came the fragile certainty that our story wasn't over yet. Morning light filtered through the kitchen window as I sat at the table, hands wrapped around the cup I'd prepared earlier. The steam rose like a promise, but inside my chest it felt like a cage. My fingers were cold despite the warmth of the mug. He came back at some vague hour, footsteps hesitant on the porch. I only heard the soft thud of knuckles tapping the wood, and I rose so fast I nearly knocked the table over. My breath caught in my throat as I crossed the entry hall, each step deliberate, questioning. The door opened and there he stood, coat damp at the hem, eyes shadowed but resolved. Heat pressed through me, tremors fluttering along my spine. I took a shaky breath. He tried a small smile that faltered like a candle in the wind. He handed me the envelope he'd carried away yesterday. My fingers brushed his as I accepted it, the faintest spark of memory igniting. He stepped forward, hands sliding into his pockets. I watched every slight movement, the slump of his shoulders, the way he bit his lip when he opened his mouth trying to find words. My own mouth was dry, tongue thick. I set the envelope on the table and slid my mug aside, eyes locked on his face. He cleared his throat, voice low and rough. I did what I said I would, he said, lifting the flap and pulling out a single sheet of paper. I gave this to her. He handed me a crumpled note, stained with moisture at the edges. My stomach flopped. I unfolded it carefully. Her handwriting curled across the page, a terse reply, something like, I heard. Don't call me, scrawled in angry loops. The words clarified everything, how far he'd gone to end the affair, the hurt he'd caused her. I folded it back and handed it to him without a word. He placed it in his pocket, like hiding a wound. Then he looked at me, whole, raw. I told her it was over. I know it's not enough, he whispered, voice cracking. I closed my eyes and inhaled, feeling my lungs balloon painfully. My jaw clenched. My hand found the mug again, squeezing it until warmth seeped through. I let out a quiet sigh. When I opened my eyes, I saw him leaning against the table, desperation etched in the lines of his face. I need you to know, he said, that I never meant to hurt either of you. He trailed off, shoulders trembling. The vulnerability cut me more sharply than betrayal. There was pity and fury curled tight in my chest. I stood and moved behind him, resting my hand on his shoulder. His skin was cold. My fingers pressed in, and he shivered. I said softly, proof matters, but trust is more than papers. I closed my eyes, remembering how it used to feel when his hand found mine without a second thought. I need to see that you mean to rebuild with me, I murmured. When our eyes met again, I saw hope flicker and then catch flame in his gaze. He nodded, startled, then straightened. I'll do whatever it takes, he said. Show you every message, every call, every moment. He searched my eyes. But I need to know you can believe me. A silence fell between us so dense I could almost touch it. My heart pounded, and I realized I was standing on shifting ground. I released his shoulder and sat down again, pulling the mug closer. He reached across the table and rested his hand over mine. Warmth spread through my fingers. I'm here now, he said. Only here. I looked down at our joined hands, feeling the thrum of blood pulsing beneath his skin. Outside, the sky lightened, a new day stretching before us. The ache in my chest eased just enough for me to whisper, then let's start. He nodded, and though I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, I felt, for the first time in a long time, that the divide between us might be bridged. And I was willing to see if that was enough to hold us together as the next chapter began. I sat at the edge of the bed, heart still throbbing from last night's confession. The dawn light seeped through thin curtains, painting soft patterns across the floorboards. I ran a hand over my face, feeling the grit of restless sleep. My limbs felt heavy, but there was a steady resolve in my chest, one that pushed me out of the room and toward the small notebook I kept on the nightstand. I flipped it open to a blank page, drew a deep breath, and wrote 3 simple words, I'm willing to, then I stopped, pen hovering. I wasn't sure how to finish the sentence, but I knew it mattered that I tried. He found me in the kitchen, sitting at the table with the notebook open and a fresh cup of tea steaming in front of me. His eyes were careful, like he didn't want to startle anything fragile inside me. I lifted the notebook for him to see. He leaned over, reading the half-formed sentence, then looked up at me. Can I help? He asked quietly. The question was so tentative it cracked something open in me. I closed the book and tapped the page. I need us to set small steps, I said, voice catching. Like check-ins at night, just 5 minutes to talk about one thing we appreciated that day, and one worry. He nodded and slid into the chair opposite me, both of us reaching for our cups at the same moment. That afternoon, we tried the first check-in. We sat on the sofa, knees almost touching, and I felt my skin prickle under his gaze. I cleared my throat. I appreciated how you came home yesterday instead of running away, I said. My voice wobbled, but he watched me, patient. Then it was his turn. He closed his eyes, exhaled slowly, and said, I appreciated how you let me give you time to come back. His words felt like a bridge, thin, maybe, but real. We finished with worries. Mine was fear that the next slip would undo months of effort. His was guilt that he might never earn back what he broke. We didn't solve anything huge, but when I reached for his hand afterward, our fingers interlaced with less caution than before. That evening, as twilight sank like ink across the sky, I suggested we take a walk by the river. The path glimmered under lamplight, and we fell into step without speaking at first. My heart beat in my throat, but the hush between us was easier to bear than the silence of betrayal. I glanced at him, saw a tight smile, and pointed at a bench near the water's edge. We sat, shoulders brushing, and I picked up a fallen leaf, tracing its veins with my fingertip. I want us to find little moments like this, I said. Things that remind us why we started here. He nodded, tossing a pebble into the dark water. The ripple spread, and I saw both of us reflected, wavering but present. Over the next few days, we carried out our small rituals, morning check-ins in whispers over coffee, evening walks without agendas, and a daily text at noon simply saying, I'm thinking of you. Sometimes the ritual felt forced, like rehearsing lines in a play we hadn't learned. Other times, it fell away naturally, and we found ourselves leaning close to share a laugh or a quiet word. I noticed his phone resting face up on the table during our tea breaks, and he noticed my notebook lying open next to it. There was no need to hide anything. Every time I caught his eye, he gave a slight nod, as if pledging anew. On the 7th day, I surprised myself by asking him to join me at a pottery class I'd been considering. My hands trembled at the wheel, but he guided my fingers, steadying the clay as we shaped a small bowl together. Our hands were smeared with wet earth, and when I looked at him, he actually laughed, light and genuine. The bowl wobbled under our touch, but we held it together, and in its imperfection I saw hope. Later, I wrote in my notebook under yesterday's date, we built something fragile and beautiful. That night, as we lay under the same blanket that once felt like home, I reached for his hand in the dark. He turned to me, eyes soft. You've been brave, he whispered. I felt tears prick at the edges of my eyes, tears for loss, for effort, and for a future that felt possible again. I squeezed his hand and whispered back, we're still a river, changing course but not lost. And in that quiet exchange, I realized that trust, once fractured, could be rebuilt drop by drop, like water seeping into a crack and slowly widening it until something new could flow again. That evening, we cooked dinner together in our cramped kitchen, the ritual I'd suggested to remind us of something we could create side by side. I chopped vegetables while he stirred the sauce, and the scent of garlic and herbs filled the air. My heart fluttered with anticipation. This was supposed to feel like home again. But when I reached for a knife, my hand trembled so badly the blade scraped my finger. A bead of blood welled up, and I pressed my thumb to my lips, tasting iron. He dropped the wooden spoon and was at my side in an instant, concern widening his eyes. I managed a shaky laugh and waved him off, but my pulse pounded with everything unspoken, fear that the fracture would reopen, guilt that I still doubted him. We plated the pasta and sat at the table, candlelight dancing across his face. I noticed how he exhaled slowly before smiling, a small, careful gesture. My chest ached with longing for the old ease, but also with pride that we'd kept these small promises. We ate in near silence, savoring the flavors as much as the fact that we were together without secrets between us. Halfway through, his phone buzzed on the counter. Before either of us could reach for it, he caught my gaze, paused, then silenced the screen. Relief and gratitude washed through me. I offered him a soft smile. He returned it, relief shining in his eyes. Later, we moved to the couch, our mugs of tea cooling in our hands. I curled into him, feeling the familiar weight of his arm around my shoulders. He rubbed circles on my back, slow, steady motions that soothed my frayed nerves. "I missed this," he murmured, voice rough with sincerity. My throat tightened. I braced my jaw against an incoming swell of tears. "Me too," I whispered, though part of me worried aloud. Could this closeness return without shadows lurking in every corner? Just then, a soft ping from my phone startled me. I pulled away and saw a message from her. Her name glowed on the lock screen. My stomach lurched as I unlocked it. Her text was simple: "I'm going to be in town tomorrow. Can we talk?" My breath hitched, my fingers went cold. I looked up at him, confusion and shock swirling in my eyes. He reached out, hand hovering over mine. "It's okay," he said, his voice gentle, but I felt the tremor in it. "You don't have to answer." My heart pounded with conflicting urges. Part of me wanted to delete the message immediately, to pretend she didn't exist. Another part felt compelled to see this through, to face the woman whose presence had torn us apart. The room felt suddenly too small, as though the walls were closing in on the fragile new thing we'd built. I swallowed hard, dry mouth stretching into a tense grin. "I should probably reply," I stammered, ducking my gaze. He squeezed my shoulder, pain flickering in his eyes. "Whatever you decide," he said, voice low. "I trust you." His words were meant as comfort, but they sounded like a test. My chest tightened with guilt and fear. Could I manage this next reckoning without shattering everything again? I tapped the screen, thumb hovering over the reply field. My breath slowed, and I closed my eyes, summoning the resolve that had carried me this far. The teacup trembled between my fingers, and I reminded myself that honesty, no matter how dangerous, had brought us here. I lifted my head, met his steady gaze, and began to type. I stared at the screen, thumb hovering over the send button. The cursor blinked like a pulse, syncing with the drumming in my temples. I reread her message: "I'm going to be in town tomorrow. Can we talk?" A wave of nausea rose, but beneath it sparked something else, an uneasy curiosity. My jaw clenched, and I pressed my tongue against the roof of my mouth to still its tremor. I looked up at him. He sat across the room, curled into the armchair we'd once claimed as ours. His eyes were wary, reflecting my own fear back at me. I swallowed. "I think I have to meet her," I whispered. My voice sounded fragile, like glass cracking. He exhaled, shoulders sagging. He reached out, hand hovering before resting briefly on mine. His skin was cool, and I felt the familiar ache of tenderness and dread tangled together. That night, I couldn't sleep. I checked my phone every 10 minutes, tracing the conversation thread, crafting and erasing replies. Guilt twisted through my chest, guilt for dragging him into this again, guilt for letting her back into my head. Dawn came without warning, a gray wash across the skyline. I slipped into jeans, heart pounding, and stepped out into the pale morning. The air felt sharp, like a blade against my lungs. I chose a café halfway between our apartment and the train station, a neutral place where answers might come easier. The barista greeted me with a nod I barely noticed. I ordered tea and sat facing the door, knees pressed together, hands wrapped around the warm mug. Every time the bell jingled, I flinched, imagining her silhouette stepping inside. My stomach churned like a storm-tossed sea. Then she walked in. She wasn't what I'd expected, no haughty smile, no swagger, just someone who looked stranded, coat buttoned tight, dark circles under her eyes. She scanned the room until her gaze landed on me. She offered a tentative half-smile that didn't reach her eyes. I stood, voice caught in my throat. She hesitated, then crossed the small space between us. We sat, two halves of the same question. I realized her hands were shaking as badly as mine. Neither of us spoke for a long moment. The cafe hum faded to a dull roar. I studied her face, soft curve of her cheek, crease at the corner of her mouth when she tried to relax. I felt a sudden surge of pity and frustration so sharp it burned. Finally, she spoke. "I'm sorry," she said, voice pitched low. "I know I hurt you." My throat tightened. I nodded, but guilt coiled tighter. I remembered all the afternoons I'd followed her footsteps, all the nights I'd waited and wondered. "Why now?" I asked, words brittle. "Why come back?" Her gaze dropped to the table. She traced a ring of condensation with her fingertip. "I never wanted to ruin what you had," she murmured, eyes meeting mine again. "I thought he'd end things, that I'd be okay stepping away. But it dragged on. Guilt kept me up at night. I needed to say goodbye properly, to face you." My heart clenched, she'd suffered, too. I leaned back, so much colliding inside me, anger that she existed between us, sorrow that she, like me, felt the ache of his betrayal. My lips parted, throat raw. "You and I, both betrayed by him," I said softly. "But I'm the one who has to rebuild a life with him now." She nodded, eyes glistening. "I understand," she whispered. The minutes passed, and each tick of the clock hammered home that our pain was shared yet separate. When I stood to leave, she reached out. Our hands touched, a brief, tremulous connection. "Thank you for meeting me," she said. I stepped back, folding my arms to hold myself steady. She slipped away, disappearing into the morning bustle. I walked home through streets washed pale by dawn. My phone buzzed, his name flashing. I paused, thumb hovering. I thought of her face, her apology. I thought of him, waiting at home, heart open. I tapped his name and sent a simple message, "I'm coming back now." My legs moved forward, carrying me toward the apartment that felt both fragile and whole. I unlocked the door and found him standing in the kitchen, hope and worry mixed in his eyes. I closed the distance and slipped into his arms. My body sagged against his, tension seeping away in the safety of his embrace. We stood like that for a long moment, two fractured souls clutching at possibility. I buried my face against his shoulder, breathing in his scent, coffee and rain and promise. Betrayal had tested every fiber of our bond, but in that soft morning light, I felt the quiet pulse of something reborn. And I knew that, together, we would face whatever came next. I woke that afternoon to the sound of rain tapping the window panes, a gentle percussion that felt like a promise of renewal. He was in the living room, curled into the armchair with my notebook open on his lap, pages filled with our small step plan and the pottery bowl we'd made together sitting on the coffee table like a trophy of fragile hope. When he looked up, his eyes met mine, steady, earnest, and I felt the familiar flutter of something hopeful trembling in my chest. I crossed the room slowly, each step weighted with curiosity and doubt, and sat on the edge of the sofa. The tea we left on the table had gone cold, but neither of us reached for it. I wondered what he saw when he read my words, "I'm willing to," uncompleted, the invitation to rebuild dangling between us. He slid the notebook toward me, cover trembling under his fingers, and offered a small, tentative smile. "Can I?" he asked, voice soft. I nodded, and he flipped to that page, fingers brushing the paper as though it were glass. His brow furrowed, then relaxed. He wrote 3 words beneath mine, "To forgive you." I felt my breath catch. Forgiveness, something I'd thought beyond me, now seemed possible, but complicated by the memory of her face in the café. I traced his handwriting with my fingertip and saw the sincerity threaded through each letter. Outside, thunder rumbled low, and the room dimmed. I cleared my throat. "I have something to show you," I said, reaching into my pocket for my phone. His smile faltered. He set the notebook aside, bracing his hands on his knees. I hesitated, heart pounding. Then I unlocked the screen and handed it to him. Displayed on the lock screen was a bookmarked article, "How to Recover from Infidelity, a Guide to Rebuilding Trust." I felt warmth flood my cheeks, embarrassment, hope, determination all at once. He tapped the article open, scanning the tips on accountability, communication, and setting boundaries. His eyes flicked up to mine, and I saw relief mingled with apprehension. "You've been planning for this," he said quietly. I nodded. I wanted us to have tools, I explained. Not just promises. I remembered the night he held that envelope and saw sorrow in his eyes. I wanted him to know I wasn't planning revenge through vindictive acts, but through honest rebuilding, if rebuilding was even possible. He closed the phone and set it beside the tea. Thank you, he whispered. His hand reached across and covered mine. The warmth was a balm. For a moment, we just sat, listening to the rain and feeling the tremor of new beginnings. Then he glanced at the pottery bowl and laughed softly. Our first project, he said. Imperfect, but ours. I smiled back, the memory of wet clay on our hands like a promise we'd kept. As evening fell, the rain eased, and I suggested we cook together again, this time without candles, without phones, just us and the familiar rhythm of chopping vegetables and stirring sauces. He agreed, and we moved into the kitchen side by side. The air filled with garlic and basil, and I noticed how he watched me with a quiet attentiveness, as though each movement mattered anew. When I reached for the knife, my hand was steady, no tremor, just the solidity of mutual effort. We plated our meal and ate at the small table where we had first confronted betrayal. Between us lay the notebook and the bowl, tokens of our reckoning and our hope. I realized that revenge wasn't always about punishment. Sometimes it was about daring to love again, more cautiously but more deeply. I lifted my glass to him. To us, I said, voice warm. He echoed, to us, and our glasses clinked, a clear, resonant sound that cut through months of silence and fear. Later, as we lay together watching the rain trickle down the glass, I pressed my head against his chest and felt his heartbeat steady beneath my ear. I thought of her once more, but not with bitterness, rather with gratitude that her absence, and her apology, had propelled us back to each other. The river between us had shifted course, but it still ran, carrying both our scars and our hope downstream into what would come next. 4. I woke that afternoon to the hum of my phone buzzing on the coffee table. He was at his desk, typing away, the soft glow of his laptop illuminating the lines of concentration around his eyes. I slipped off the couch and padded over, watching him for a moment, how he paused mid-sentence, fingers hovering above the keys, as if he felt me before I spoke. I got an email, he said, swiveling the screen toward me. It was an invitation to a work showcase, one of those events he'd always loved, where he'd stand under bright lights and pitch ideas to a crowd. I felt a flutter in my chest. It should have been a simple celebration, but everything still carried an echo of fear. What if he slipped back into secrecy? What if this night pulled him away from me again? I reached out and covered his hand. Go, I told him softly. I'll be here. He hesitated, doubt flickering in his eyes, before closing the laptop with a decisive click. He stood and wrapped me in a quick hug, warm, earnest. I whispered, be safe. That evening, I paced the living room in the dim lamplight, listening for the key in the lock. When he finally returned, his coat damp with mist, I rushed to meet him. His cheeks were flushed, but his eyes were bright. It went well, he said, dropping his bag. They loved the pitch. Relief washed through me. I reached for his hand, but he gently pulled back and lifted a small envelope from his pocket. I thought of you, he said, holding it out. Inside was a ticket stub from the reception downstairs, a little reminder that even in crowds, he was thinking of our world at home. My throat tightened. I realized how far we'd come, from cold silences to open offers of proof, from guarded apologies to thoughtful tokens. We stood close in the soft glow of the lamp, the envelope between us like a bridge. I pressed my forehead to his chest and breathed in the scent of his coat, rain and determination. In that quiet space, I understood that trust wasn't restored by grand gestures but by moments like this, small invitations to belong, again and again. And as the evening settled around us, I knew we were learning how to love in the light of new beginnings. I found the crumpled receipt wedged between the pages of my notebook when I was clearing the coffee table that evening. It was one of those routine hospital slips, lab tests, an unreadable code, a small balance due, tucked into my pen loop as if it had slipped there by accident. My hand froze on the edge of the table, pulse drumming so loud I thought it might echo through the walls. I'd seen a similar code on the suspense-filled receipts I'd gathered during our worst weeks, but I'd never asked why. I slipped the paper into my pocket and watched him from the kitchen doorway as he washed dishes, water streaming over his hands in busy rhythms. Steam curled around his fresh-washed sleeves. He hummed softly, an old tune I recognized, and for a moment, I felt that fragile peace we'd reclaimed. Then a cold knot tightened in my stomach, and I realized I needed answers before the next sunrise. I set my jaw and stepped forward. "Can we talk?" My voice felt small. He turned, eyes bright but wary, foam dripping between his fingers. He nodded and dried his hands on a towel, shoulders straightening as though bracing for news. I held up the slip of paper. "What is this?" I asked quietly. His face went pale, lips parting then snapping shut. He reached out, but I pulled the receipt back. His Adam's apple bobbed. "It's nothing," he said, voice low. "Just a medical routine." I pressed the paper under his nose. "Routine? You hid this from me." My chest tightened, my legs felt like they might buckle. He closed his eyes, exhaling in a rush that rattled his frame. When he spoke, it was halting, each word weighed down by something heavy. "I was going to tell you," he began. I didn't know how." His hands twisted the towel until the fabric creased white. "I've been sick." My heart lodged in my throat. Sick. The word echoed like a betrayal sharper than any affair. "Why didn't you say anything?" I whispered, voice catching. "Why keep medical bills in secret?" He swallowed hard, throat bobbing. I was ashamed. I thought I could handle it on my own, between work and everything else. And then, I saw her one night at the clinic waiting room. She was there visiting a friend, and we talked. One thing led to another, and I was tired of pretending everything was fine. I was scared. His eyes glistened with unfallen tears. "I never meant to hurt you." A wave of conflicting emotion crashed through me, anger, pity, sorrow. My legs wobbled. I leaned against the counter, knuckles white. "You betrayed me because you were sick," I said, voice brittle. "You traded our trust for comfort." He shook his head, stepping closer. "I know it sounds unforgivable. But when you look at me the way you did, every step I took to hide it, I panicked. I thought if you left me, nothing else would matter. The fear, it poisoned me." He pressed the towel into the sink, then reached out, gently touching my arm. His skin was cool, and my pulse surged. Tears blurred my vision. I remembered that night he'd followed me to the café, how raw our confrontation had been, how we'd pieced ourselves back together. Now everything felt like glass, fragile under the weight of this new truth. My body trembled, fear, betrayal, and compassion all tangling in my chest. I stepped back, pulling free. "I needed you to trust me," I said, voice shaking. "But you kept lying." My words stung me as much as him. He closed his eyes, remorse etched in every line of his face. Silence stretched between us like a canyon. Then he spoke again, softer. "I want to make it right. I'll share every bill, every appointment, everything. I'll bring you into it, if you'll let me." My throat tightened. I thought of the nights I'd followed whispers and half-truths, of the ache that had driven me to the edge of vengeance. Now, standing here with his vulnerability laid bare, I realized revenge wasn't what I needed. I needed honesty, no matter how painful. I exhaled and held out my hand. In my palm lay the receipt. He took it, and I saw relief and fear mingle in his eyes. "I'm scared," he whispered. "But I don't want this to tear us apart." I nodded, voice soft. "Then no more secrets, ever." I leaned in and let my tears fall, the first honest ones in months. He wrapped his arms around me, and I felt the tremor in his chest. In that embrace, I understood that betrayal had many forms, and forgiveness would demand its own reckoning. Outside, the rain began again, gentle as a promise. In the hush of our reunion, I realized this was the final turning point, where trust could either mend or shatter for good. And in his honest confession, I found the sliver of hope we'd both been chasing. I woke to the hush of early light slipping through the half-closed blinds, the room still heavy with yesterday's confession and tonight's unspoken promise. He was asleep beside me, chest rising and falling in slow, steady rhythms that used to feel like home. But now, in that fragile half-world between wakefulness and dream, I realized something important. Forgiving him hadn't erased all the cuts of betrayal, and mercy didn't mean forgetting. My hand hovered over his shoulder, skin warm beneath my fingertips, but I pulled back. I rolled onto my side and stared at the window, breathing in and out until my heart found its quiet pulse. Outside, the sky was pale as paper, and the street below held that tentative calm before a city really wakes. I wondered how long I'd linger here, bound by habit, tethered by what had been, before I could step forward into what must come next. He stirred, eyelids fluttering open. His gaze found mine, hopeful and gentle. I offered him a small smile, the kind that trembles at the edges. "Morning," he whispered, voice husky. He reached for my hand, but I turned away and slipped from the bed. The cool floor bit at my feet, and I shivered, remembering how many times I'd feared this moment, the one where grace meets reality, and choices must be made. In the kitchen, I brewed tea without looking back. Steam spiraled upward, carrying soft relief and a flicker of doubt. I wrapped my hands around the mug, feeling the warmth through the ceramic. The notebook lay on the table, its pages heavy with plans and promises, and beside it, the pottery bowl, still imperfect, still ours. I traced its rim absently, as though seeking reassurance. He entered quietly, coat over one arm, the envelope from the reception still tucked in his pocket. He paused when he saw me, eyebrows knitting together. "I thought he began, voice hesitant. I held up a finger. "Wait," I said softly, heart fluttering. He stood, shifting weight from one foot to the other, eyes earnest. "I know we promised," he started again. I set the mug down, tea sloshing over my knuckles. "I know," I said, voice steady but gentle. "But today, I need something else." His expression flickered, worry, fear, maybe hope. I didn't meet his eyes. Instead, I picked up the receipt from my pocket, the one that had revealed his illness. I laid it on the table, corners curling. He watched, confusion surfacing. "What are you?" I met his gaze at last. "This," I said, voice wavering. "This is the truth you hid. It's part of you, now part of us, but I can't carry it for you forever." My chest felt tight, as though each word pressed against ribs. "I forgave your deceit. I even forgave the affair when I understood your fear. But I can't stay here pretending nothing has changed." He swallowed, eyes glistening. "I don't understand." His voice cracked. I took a trembling breath. "I need space to heal, to live with my own heart, without shadows at every corner." Heat rose to my cheeks. "I need us to stop holding on to the past, even this house feels like it's holding on to memories I can't unlearn." The silence stretched, laden with everything we'd said and everything we hadn't. He stepped forward, hand outstretched. "Please, stay," he begged. "Let me prove." I shook my head, tears slipping down. "Proving feels like begging," I whispered. "I need proving on both our parts." I picked up my coat from the chair and slipped it on. The fabric felt stiff across my shoulders, like armor. He tried to close the distance, but I stepped around the table. His face fell, fear, regret, sorrow all mingling there. "I'm sorry," he choked. "I love you." I paused at the door, hand on the knob. "I know," I said softly, "and I loved you." I opened the door, the morning light spilling in like cold water. I hesitated, heart pounding, then stepped through and closed it behind me. The hallway was quiet as I padded down the stairs. Each footstep echoed like a goodbye. Outside, the air was crisp, and I inhaled deeply, tasting both freedom and loss. I didn't look back. I walked away from the door that held our memories, the half-formed promises, the fragile pottery bowl, the receipt that first cracked open the truth. I turned the corner and saw the sky open above me, wide and uncertain. My heart throbbed with both sorrow and resolve. I realized that sometimes revenge isn't in punishment but in choosing yourself, stepping into your own future despite the ache of betrayal. And so I kept walking, letting the city's morning pulse guide my steps, each one a promise that I would rebuild not beside him, but within myself, untethered and free.